Marcus should have known something was wrong when the radio died. It wasn't a gradual thing. No static, no fade, no warning. 1 second he had Johnny Cash telling him about a burning ring of fire. Then there was just silence. Flat. Absolute. Like someone had pressed a thumb over the speaker. He checked the display. Still lit. Still showing the station numbers. The volume knob turned without resistance. Everything looked functional. Nothing worked. He told himself it was a dead spot. New Mexico was full of them. You drove long enough through the high desert and the land swallowed your signal like it swallowed everything else out here. Moisture, color, sound. He'd been driving since 6 in the morning. It was now pushing 10 at night. The scrubland on either side of Highway 64 had gone from burnt amber to black somewhere around dusk. He was tired in the way that made your eyes feel like they were floating slightly forward in your skull. The GPS had gone out 20 minutes earlier. That one he'd actually noticed, because the little blue dot that was supposed to be him had simply vanished from the screen. Not rerouted, not searching for signal, just gone. And the map behind it had grayed out, featureless, like the land ahead of him hadn't been mapped yet, or refused to be. He was 4 hours from Albuquerque. He knew this stretch of road well enough, or thought he did. He'd driven it twice before, once on the way to his father's place outside Taos, and once back, both times in daylight, both times with his girlfriend, Kara, in the passenger seat. Back then, silence and emptiness felt romantic. Now they felt threatening. Kara wasn't here. She was back in their apartment in Denver, probably watering the plants, probably watching something on her laptop, probably not thinking about him at all. Which was fine, which was exactly what he wanted when he left that morning, because the fight had been about space, how he never gave her any. Now he had too much of it. The irony wasn't lost on him. He gripped the steering wheel and kept driving. The headlights reached maybe 100 feet ahead. Beyond that, darkness. Not ordinary darkness. Darkness so complete it almost had texture, like it was pressing against the windshield. The road stretched perfectly straight through the mesa. He hadn't seen another car in nearly 40 minutes. He considered pulling over to check his phone, then remembered he'd already tried. Twice. 1 bar, gone the moment he actually needed it. He was alone. Not just physically alone. The kind of alone that existed before phones, before civilization, before help. That's when he saw the figure, standing at the very edge of his headlights, right where the light ended and the darkness began. At first, he thought it was a road sign, then maybe a hitchhiker, but it was too tall, too thin, and it wasn't standing like a person. Its weight rested on one leg, its body leaned slightly forward, its arms hung unusually long at its sides. Marcus didn't slow down. He kept his foot on the gas. He told himself it was someone waiting for a ride. Perfectly normal. People broke down. People got stranded. He passed it at 70 miles an hour. For less than half a second, it entered the full beam of his headlights. He saw it was facing away from the road, looking out into the desert, not trying to stop him, not watching him, just standing there, staring into nothing. Then, his brain caught something else, something it refused to understand until he was already past it. The figure's head was turned completely around, not looking toward him, the wrong way. Its body faced forward, its face looked backward, its neck twisted at an angle no human body could survive. Marcus drove another mile before his hands started shaking. He almost stopped at the lodge. The sign was hand-lettered, faded, mounted on a wooden post leaning about 15 degrees to one side. Arroyo Pines Lodging. Vacancy, 3 miles. Under normal circumstances, Under any other circumstances, he would have kept driving. He already had a reservation in a Holiday Inn Express in Santa Fe. But his hands were still shaking. His mouth was dry. He needed to stop moving, to stop sitting inside a small box of glass and metal while the desert pressed its darkness against every window. He turned. The road to the lodge was unpaved, full of deep ruts. Juniper trees lined both sides, their branches reaching over the road as if trying to touch each other overhead. His headlights bounced with every bump. After about 1.5 miles, he started thinking he'd made a mistake. Maybe the sign had been there for years. Maybe the lodge had closed long ago. Maybe he was driving toward a dead end in the middle of nowhere. Then, the trees opened, and he saw lights. The lodge was long and low, adobe walls, painted a dark red that had faded into something closer to rust. A covered porch stretched across the front. 2 bare light bulbs swung gently in a breeze Marcus couldn't feel from inside his car. 4, maybe 5 rooms faced the parking lot. Only one had light beneath the door. Room 4. The rest were completely dark. Marcus stayed in the driver's seat for a moment. Off to the left, about 50 yards away, was another building, smaller. Maybe a storage shed, maybe something else. He couldn't make out many details, but he had the strange feeling that it had been built recently. The wood looked raw, the walls unfinished. Inside the main office, a light was on. Marcus climbed out of the car. The cool air hit him immediately. It carried the scent of pine resin, mixed with something older, something earthy. The smell of a place that had stood here for decades, absorbing the land around it. He walked onto the porch and knocked against the screen door frame. A moment passed, then the inside door opened. An older woman stood behind the screen. Maybe 60, maybe older. Gray hair pulled back tightly, dark eyes that caught the porch light with unusual sharpness. She wore a flannel shirt despite the warm season. She studied him the way people in remote places study strangers. Not unfriendly, just careful. Need a room? If you have one. I have several. She pushed open the screen door. Come in. Her name was Dolores. She'd been running the lodge alone since her husband passed away 4 years earlier. She told him while he filled out an old-fashioned paper registration card, the kind with carbon paper underneath. Marcus hadn't seen one in years. The office was warm. It smelled of coffee, and somewhere deeper inside, a pot of stew simmered. A crucifix hung on the wall. Beneath it, a bundle of dried plants tied together with red thread. It looked like something you'd buy from a roadside stand, except the thread had been tied with deliberate care, almost like a charm. He thought about asking. He didn't. Room 3. She handed him an actual metal key attached to a plastic diamond-shaped tag. End of the building, away from the road, quieter. He thanked her, then asked if there was anywhere nearby to get food. Kitchen's closed, but I've got stew on, if you want a bowl. He followed her into the kitchen. It felt warm, comfortable, lived in. Shelves packed with canned food, ceramic figurines, a calendar showing the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, stacks of paperback novels, a coffee can filled with pens, and a framed photograph of a smiling man, probably her husband, standing outside the lodge. The stew was good, really good. He finished one bowl, then another. Halfway through the second, Dolores spoke. You saw something. Marcus looked up. She was watching him from across the table. What do you mean? On the road, coming in. She wasn't asking. You've got the look. He slowly set down his spoon. He considered lying. Instead, there was a figure, standing on the shoulder. He swallowed. Its head was wrong. Dolores nodded, slowly,
as though she'd just been told something she already knew. Was it face in the desert? Marcus felt every hair on his arms stand up. Yes. She stood, carried her bowl to the sink, kept her back turned towards him. Then she spoke quietly. "Don't go outside tonight." A pause. "No matter what you hear."
Room 3 was small, clean, a double bed with a green wool blanket, a nightstand with a single lamp. One window overlooked the back of the property. Beyond it, nothing but scrubland, open desert, and the dark outline of a mesa beneath the night sky. The bathroom was simple: a shower, a sink, a bar of soap still wrapped in paper. Marcus sat on the edge of his bed with his phone. 2 bars of signal. He called Kara. She answered on the second ring, which meant she hadn't been asleep, which meant she'd been waiting. Maybe things between them weren't as broken as they had seemed that morning. That thought comforted him, a little. He told her about the drive, the radio, the GPS. He didn't tell her about the figure. He didn't mention what Dolores had warned him. He simply said he'd be home in 2 days. She said, "Okay, be careful. I watered the plants." He smiled. "I'm glad about the plants." They said goodnight, not because everything was fixed, but because they were trying. Marcus lay back on the bed, still wearing his clothes. He was exhausted. Sleep should have come instantly. It didn't. The room wasn't silent. Remote places never are. The building creaked softly. Wind whispered through the juniper trees. Something small moved through the brush outside. Probably harmless. Probably. He stared at the ceiling. His mind kept returning to the figure, the twisted neck, the impossible angle, the way it had violated something fundamental about the human body. Then he heard it, a sound from above, not the building settling, not the wind. Footsteps, 4 slow steps, then silence. 4 more, another pause. It took him several seconds to realize what he was hearing. Something was walking across the roof. Heavy footsteps, slow, evenly spaced, moving from the far end of the lodge toward his room. Marcus slowly sat up. The footsteps stopped directly above him. Silence. He waited. Nothing. He told himself it was an animal, a dog, maybe. He'd heard stories of dogs climbing onto flat roofs in this part of the country. He clung to that explanation for about 30 seconds. Then something leaned over the edge of his window. The window sat behind the head of the bed. He couldn't see it directly, but he could see its shadow stretching across the opposite wall. A long arm reached down, fingers spread against the glass. Then a head appeared, upside down, pressing against the window. He couldn't make out a face, only shapes, but everything about it was wrong. The head was too large, the neck far too long, the fingers bent at impossible angles, as though they had too many joints. Marcus didn't move. Later, he could never remember exactly how long he stayed frozen. Time stopped making sense. The shadow remained, its hand against the glass, its head tilted, watching him. He remembered Dolores's warning, "Don't go outside tonight, no matter what you hear." Now he understood. It wanted him outside. Then it spoke, a human voice, a voice he knew. Marcus? His father's voice. His father had died 8 months earlier, a stroke. He still listened to one old voicemail every now and then, just to hear him again. "Marcus, it's cold out here. Let me in. Buddy." Buddy, that's what his father had always called him. Not every day, but enough. Saturday mornings, hardware stores, long drives, his old red truck, memories that should have stayed safe forever. Now, that word came from something standing outside his window. It was the most horrifying thing Marcus had ever experienced. He stood up, not to open the window. He grabbed the bedside lamp, pulled off the lampshade, held the heavy ceramic base with both hands, like a weapon. He positioned himself between the window and the door. Then he waited. The voice stopped. The shadow didn't. Marcus stood there, holding the lamp, for what he believed was nearly 2 hours. When the sky outside the window finally began to lighten, not sunrise, just the first hint of dawn, the shadow was gone. Marcus didn't remember seeing it leave. He was almost certain he'd stayed awake the entire night, yet somehow the moment it disappeared had escaped him. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. He was sitting on the floor, still gripping the ceramic lamp. His hands ached. When the sun finally rose, orange, warm, honest, he unlocked the door to room 3. The porch was empty. Every other room was still closed. Beyond the parking area, birds called from the juniper trees. Normal sounds, comforting sounds. To Marcus, they were proof. Animals always know when something is wrong. If the birds were singing, whatever had been outside was gone. He walked carefully around the back of the lodge, never stepping off the porch. His eyes followed the roof line above his room. Then he saw them. Deep scratches, 4 long parallel grooves carved into the stucco. They began at the edge of the roof and ran downward, stopping just above his window, as though something had lowered itself over the edge, lost its grip, then caught itself again. Marcus stared at the marks for a long time. Eventually, he walked back to the office, knocked once. Dolores opened the door, still wearing the same flannel shirt, or maybe another one exactly like it. A coffee mug rested in her hands. She took one look at his face, then quietly said, "Come in." Marcus told her everything, the footsteps, the shadow, the voice, his father's voice. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she poured him a cup of coffee, set it gently in front of him, then sat across the table. "What is it?" His voice was rough, more demand than question. Dolores looked down at her hands. "Old thing, very old. The Navajo call it Yi Naldloshi. There are other names. Other peoples have other names." She spoke carefully, like someone repeating words that deserved respect. "It copies people," Marcus whispered. "It mimics." She corrected him. "There's a difference. A parrot mimics. This thing, it understands what it copies. It learns. It knows exactly which voice will make you open the door." Marcus swallowed. "My father?" "Yes." "How did it know?" Dolores slowly shook her head. "It's been doing this for a long time. It knows things. I don't know how." She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "You didn't open the door?" "No." "Good." She nodded once. "That's the important part. The whole thing. You don't go to it. It can't force you. It can't make you do anything you don't choose." Marcus frowned. "But what stops it from—" He stopped himself. He didn't want to finish the sentence. Breaking the window, coming through the wall, doing something worse. Dolores answered anyway. "It operates. It operates by a kind of consent." She chose each word carefully, as though she'd spent years trying to explain something impossible. "I don't pretend to understand it, but the rules seem to hold. It wants you to come to it. It wants you to open the door yourself." Marcus stared into his coffee. "And if you don't?" She answered without hesitation. "Eventually, it leaves." Silence settled over the room. Then Marcus asked the question he dreaded. "Does it come back?" Dolores looked at him steadily. "Sometimes, for some people."
How do you know which people? She stood, walked to the sink. Just like the night before, she seemed to think more clearly with her back turned. After a long pause, she finally answered, I don't know. I've never found a pattern.
He should have left then. He packed his bag, loaded it into the car, started the engine. The radio came back to life. A country station. Something ordinary, something familiar. For a moment, he almost cried. Not because of the song, because everything suddenly felt normal. He sat behind the wheel, engine idling, looking toward the smaller structure beside the lodge, the one he'd noticed the night before. In daylight, it looked different, older. The wood was raw, but weathered. Not newly built, just stripped bare. The walls rose only to about chest height. Above that, nothing. No roof. The doorway was so low, anyone entering would have to duck. Marcus told himself he wasn't getting out of the car. A few seconds later, he got out anyway. The structure stood near the edge of the property, where the lodge gave way to open desert. Up close, the wood smelled of fresh pine, mixed with that same strange scent he'd noticed before. Something older, something buried beneath the earth. On the outside wall, facing the desert, there were marks. Not carvings, not scratches, more like impressions, handprints. Several of them pressed deep into the wood, at different heights. Too high. Far too high for anyone standing on the ground. Unless they'd been reaching down. Marcus stared at them, then looked toward the desert. The mesa stood roughly 2 miles away. Flat, silent. Morning light spread across the sagebrush and scattered juniper trees. Everything looked empty. Except, at the base of the mesa, there was something. A dark shape. Perfectly still. Too far away to identify. Too far away to know whether it was watching him, or simply waiting. He stood there for several moments. It never moved. Finally, Marcus turned, walked back to his car, then drove to the office. Dolores answered after the first knock. He pointed toward the smaller building. That structure. What is it? She didn't even look at it. She kept her eyes on him. A place for it. Marcus frowned. What do you mean? We coexist. She said it calmly. That doesn't mean we're comfortable. This is its land. I can't change that. So, I give it somewhere to arrive. She paused, searching for the right words. If I know where it is, I know where it isn't. She looked directly at him. The guests don't sleep on that side of the property. Marcus thought back. Room 3, the opposite end of the lodge. He finally understood why she'd chosen it. So, he hesitated. It goes into that structure, and then leaves before morning? She nodded. Usually. That single word settled heavily between them. Marcus wanted to ask one more question. The question he'd been avoiding. Had she ever seen it? Not the shadow, not the borrowed voices, not the thing pretending to be someone else. The real thing. Its true face. Whatever hid beneath all the mimicry. He looked at Dolores. For a moment, he thought she might answer. Instead, he realized something. He didn't actually want to know. Some questions are safer unanswered. Marcus drove back to Highway 64, turned east, and didn't stop until he reached Santa Fe. About an hour later,
He pulled into a diner. Ordered eggs, coffee. Nothing more. He ate slowly, methodically, staring at the table, trying to organize everything that had happened. He couldn't. Eventually, he called his older brother, Jesse, the one who still lived near the town where they grew up, the one who had been beside their father when he died. Marcus hadn't made it in time. He'd arrived 4 hours too late. Jesse answered. "Hey." "Hey." A brief silence. Then Jesse asked, "You okay?" Marcus hesitated, then quietly said, "I heard Dad's voice last night." Another silence. Longer this time. "Where are you?" "New Mexico. Driving home." Jesse started to speak. "You need to..." "I know." Marcus rubbed his eyes. "I know what it was. I know what it wasn't." Jesse frowned. "What do you mean, you know what it was?" Marcus didn't answer. Not directly. Instead, he asked, "Do you ever think you hear someone who's gone? Like, you hear their voice in a crowd, or you see someone walking, and for just a second, you think it's them?" Jesse answered quietly, "Yeah. Sure." Marcus nodded to himself. "It's like that. Only stronger." He knew that wasn't true. Not really. But it was the only version he could explain. The only version another person could understand. He drove the rest of the way home over the next day and a half. Interstate 25 north, then west. He kept the radio on the entire time. Constant voices, constant music, anything to fill the silence. Whenever darkness fell, he kept his eyes fixed on the center of the road. Never the shoulders. Never the places just beyond the headlights. He refused to look. Marcus reached Denver on a Tuesday morning. Kara was waiting. She'd taken the day off work. She hadn't told him. The apartment smelled like fresh coffee. The plants had been watered. Again. Even though they didn't need it. She'd simply wanted something to do. Marcus stood quietly in the doorway, his bag hanging from one hand. Kara looked at him. "You look terrible." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to him in weeks. He set his bag down, walked inside, sat beside her on the couch. Then, he told her everything he could. Not every detail. Not every impossible moment. Only as much as words could carry. She listened, without interrupting. Something she rarely did. When he finished, she slipped her hand over his. Together, they stared out the apartment window, watching the Denver skyline. After a long silence, she finally asked, "Do you think it will follow you?" Marcus had been asking himself that same question for 2 days. "I don't think so. I think it's tied to that place. I think it belongs there." Kara looked at him. "But you're not sure?" He shook his head. "No, I'm not." She squeezed his hand. She didn't tell him he imagined it. She didn't blame exhaustion, or grief, or stress. She didn't tell him it had all been a nightmare. For that, Marcus was deeply grateful. Sometimes, being believed is the greatest comfort another person can offer.
3 weeks passed. Nothing happened. Marcus slept, went back to work. He called Jesse a couple of times, not because he had anything important to say, just to hear a familiar voice, a real voice, one he knew he could trust. Things with Kara changed too. They still disagreed sometimes, but the arguments never lasted as long. After what had happened in New Mexico, the little things didn't seem as important anymore. Every day, Marcus thought about the lodge, about Dolores, about the quiet strength she carried, living beside something she could never truly understand. He thought about the deep scratches on the wall, the strange wooden structure at the edge of the property, the place she'd built simply so she would know where it was. He kept thinking about one word: coexistence. Was it courage, or was it surrender? Eventually, he decided it was probably both. On the 23rd day, he woke suddenly, 3 o'clock in the morning. He knew the exact day because, without admitting it to himself, he'd been counting. At first, he didn't know what had woken him. Then, he heard it. A sound. Outside the window. Marcus froze. They lived on the 4th floor. The sound was soft, patient, like something resting its weight against the outside wall. He lay perfectly still beside Kara. She was asleep, breathing slowly, peacefully. Marcus listened. The sound began to move, slowly, sliding along the wall, at exactly the height of the window. Then it stopped. A long silence followed. Then a voice. Marcus. His father's voice. Exactly the same. Every word, every tone, every tiny imperfection. "Buddy, you awake?" Marcus closed his eyes, forced himself to breathe, slow, steady, the way Kara had taught him after his father's funeral. One breath, then another. He didn't answer. He didn't move. He didn't open the window. Instead, he reached across the bed, placed his hand gently over Kara's. She never woke. She continued sleeping peacefully beside him. Marcus waited. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Eventually, the sound outside disappeared. The voice never returned. He remained awake until dawn. Gray light filled the room, then blue, then the familiar golden sunlight of a Denver morning. Kara stretched, yawned, looked over at him. "You sleep okay?" Marcus thought carefully before answering. "Not great." She smiled softly. "Bad dreams?"
He looked toward the window, then back at her. Something like that.
Before Marcus left the lodge that morning, before he packed the car, before he sat watching the dark shape beneath the mesa, Dolores told him one last thing. She stood in the office doorway. Marcus stood on the porch. The morning sun was beginning to warm the desert. The sky above the mesa shifted from pale gray to soft blue. Without looking at him, she said, "The people it visits, some of them, eventually go to it." Marcus looked at her. She continued, "Not all of them, and not right away. Sometimes, years later." She stared out across the desert. They hear the voice. They know it isn't real. They know exactly what it is. But they've heard it for so long, they're tired, so tired. And eventually, a part of them begins to wonder, what if this time it really is them? What if some part of the person they lost is actually still there? She finally turned toward him. Her eyes were steady, clear. It understands grief. It always has. Marcus didn't answer. Dolores shook her head gently. "I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you because understanding how it works is the only protection you have." She paused. "As long as you know why you want to open the door, you won't." Marcus drove away, thinking about those words. He's still thinking about them. He doesn't know what the thing truly is, what kind of creature learns to navigate human sorrow with such terrifying precision. He doesn't know what it wants, what it gains from borrowing familiar voices, or what happens to the people who finally give in. Dolores either didn't know or chose not to say. He knows only this: it travels, it finds people, it waits, patiently. Time means something different to it. He knows grief is the door, love is the key, and together, those two things are exactly what it needs. Some nights, he lies awake in the dark and hears his father's voice perfectly. Every detail, the slight roughness, the warmth, the ordinary love of a father calling his son Buddy. Marcus knows exactly what he's hearing. He knows exactly what it is. He knows why every part of him wants to open the window. He doesn't, not yet. I've debated posting this for 11 months. Not because I don't think you'll believe me. I stopped caring about that somewhere around the 4th night. I'm posting it because 3 weeks ago, someone in a hiking forum described something they saw near the Utah-Arizona border and used a specific phrase. It was standing wrong. I felt my stomach drop through the floor because that is the exact phrase I wrote in my journal the night it started. So, here we go. My name is Ryan. I'm 29 years old. I work in supply chain logistics. I live in Flagstaff, Arizona. I own a beige Toyota Tacoma and a rescue dog named Pretzels. I've never in my life believed in anything I couldn't touch, measure, or verify. I mention this not because skeptics make more credible witnesses. They don't, necessarily. I mention it because I want you to understand the distance I had to travel to get from who I was before to who I am now. The distance is not comfortable. Last September, my sister Kelsey and I did a 4-day backpacking loop through the Kaibab Plateau. We'd done it once before, 5 years earlier, the summer after our mom died,
when we both needed something physical and exhausting to put our bodies through. That trip had been brutal, necessary, and good in the way that brutal and necessary things sometimes are. This trip was supposed to be a reunion of that. Kelsey had moved to Portland 18 months earlier for a job, and we'd done the thing adult siblings do where you mean to see each other, then the calendar fills up, and suddenly a year has passed. We planned the Kaibab loop over 6 weeks, bought new gear, coordinated the shuttle, and met at the North Rim trailhead on a Tuesday morning in late September. The plateau was everything it always is in fall. Ponderosa pines turning gold at the tips, cold air that let you see your breath, and the kind of silence that settles on you with actual weight. We hiked 11 miles the first day and camped near a meadow at about 8,000 feet. We made freeze-dried pasta, drank whiskey from a flask, and talked about everything we hadn't talked about in months. Her job, my relationship with Emma, the anniversary of our mom's death coming closer, how grief changes shape over time but never really gets smaller. I'm telling you about Kelsey because she matters, because eventually this story becomes about her, in a way that still makes it feel like something is sitting on my chest whenever I think about it. Day 2, we reached the junction toward Fire Point. Everything was normal. That night, sometime around 2 in the morning, I heard something outside the tent. I don't want to oversell this part. It wasn't cinematic. It wasn't immediately terrifying. It was just a sound. Footsteps. Heavy, irregular, slowly circling the tent. I unzipped my sleeping bag, listened for a minute, and decided it was probably a deer or an elk. Both move through that area all the time, so I went back to sleep. The next morning, I walked around the campsite. The footprints weren't from a deer. They weren't from an elk. They were bipedal, 2 feet, not 4. The stride was impossibly long, almost 4 feet between each print, longer than any human legs should naturally allow. Then I noticed something else. The footprints were deep at the toes and barely visible at the heels, like whatever made them had been leaning forward the entire time, balanced on the front of its feet, as if it had been standing there, watching our tent. I stared at the tracks. Then I looked toward the tree line. I didn't say anything to Kelsey. That was my first mistake.
We'd covered maybe 8 miles when Kelsey stopped on the trail. "Something's following us," she said. She said it like she'd known it for a while and was finally tired of pretending she didn't. Matter of fact. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring into the trees off the left side of the trail. "Since when?" I asked. "Since the switchbacks." We'd come through a long series of switchbacks about 2 hours earlier. "I keep hearing something in the trees, same pace as us, stops when we stop." I'd heard it too. I just hadn't said anything. We'd both done the same thing, held on to the same fear without saying it out loud. "Probably an animal," I said, because that's the first explanation your brain reaches for. She looked at me. "What kind of animal?" I didn't have an answer. The sounds were wrong for deer, too deliberate, too steady, not the random crashing you'd expect from something moving through brush, too heavy for anything smaller. "Let's just keep moving," I said. We made camp earlier than we'd planned. The campsite sat beside a creek bed with open ground around it, clear sight lines, very little tree cover nearby. I told Kelsey I'd picked it because of the water. That was true, just not the whole truth. That night, I barely slept. The sounds never came back. Somehow, that was worse. I kept waiting for them, listening for them, wondering if it had left, or if it had simply stopped making noise. I lay awake watching the ceiling of the tent shift gently in the wind, thinking about those footprints, thinking about the tree line. I didn't finally fall asleep until almost 4 in the morning. The next morning, while I was heating water for coffee,
Kelsey walked over and sat across from me with her sleeping bag wrapped around her shoulders. "I saw something last night." I slowly set the pot down. "I got up around midnight to pee. I didn't wake you. When I came back out of the trees." She stopped, picked at the sleeve of her fleece. "There was something across the creek, standing in the creek bed, in the open." "What did it look like?" She thought for a long moment. Kelsey is a scientist. She trusts careful descriptions. Watching her struggle to describe what she'd seen scared me more than the description itself. Tall, really tall, 7 feet, maybe more, and thin, like wrong proportions, like someone stretched a person vertically. She glanced toward the creek. It was just standing there, not moving. I think it had its back to me. I couldn't really tell. It was hard to tell? She looked directly at me. The head was wrong. I couldn't tell which way it was facing. That's when I told her about the footprints. Neither of us spoke for a while after that. The creek flowed quietly over the rocks. A camp robber jay landed beside our food bags, then flew away. "Do you want to go back?" I asked. She thought about it. "We're only 1 day from the car." That's not what I asked. She looked at me with that expression I'd known since we were kids, the one that meant she wasn't scared, she was deciding. "No," she said, "I don't want to go back." So we made rules. We stayed within 10 feet of each other. No wandering off, no exploring alone, not even to use the bathroom. We set an alarm for 3 in the morning. If either of us heard or saw anything, we'd wake the other immediately. We were trying to build structure around something that might not follow any rules at all.
I want to get this part exactly right, so I'm going to go slow. At approximately 12:40 a.m., I checked my watch. I woke up without knowing why. That happens sometimes. Your brain pulls you out of sleep for no obvious reason. I lay perfectly still and listened. The creek, the wind, Kelsey breathing beside me. Then I heard something else. A voice, outside the tent, maybe 30 feet away near the tree line. Kelsey's voice. Exactly Kelsey's voice. The same cadence, the same pitch. It said my name, Ryan. I want to be very clear about something. Kelsey was lying 18 inches to my left. I could hear her breathing. I could feel the warmth coming off her sleeping bag. She did not say my name. The voice outside said it again, Ryan. Then it laughed, a short laugh, Kelsey's laugh, the one that's always just a little too loud, the laugh I'd heard thousands of times growing up. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I reached over and put my hand on Kelsey's shoulder. I shook her gently, then harder. She woke with a sharp inhale. "What?" "Quiet," I whispered. "Listen." We listened. The voice spoke again. "Ryan, come on, it's cold." Kelsey's voice, patient, slightly teasing, exactly the way she'd sound if I was taking too long to do something. Beside me, Kelsey went completely still, not asleep, not relaxed, rigid. "That's my voice," she whispered. "I know." "That's exactly my voice." "I know." Then the voice came again, closer this time. "Ryan, I forgot my headlamp. Can you bring it?" It was such an ordinary thing to say. That was the terrifying part. Not, "Help me," not, "I'm hurt," just, "I forgot my headlamp." A tiny inconvenience, something you'd solve without thinking, something that would take 5 seconds. It wasn't just copying her voice, it was copying her, the way she'd actually talk, the kind of thing she'd actually say. "Don't answer it," I whispered. "I wasn't going to. Don't make any sound." We lay there in complete silence. My hand found Kelsey's. She squeezed it so hard it hurt.
The voice called my name again. Then it called Kelsey's name. Hearing her own voice say her own name, I felt her flinch beside me. Then, silence. For about 2 minutes, nothing. Then something pressed against the outside of the tent. Not violently, not like it was trying to get in, just a slow, steady pressure somewhere near the foot of the tent. The fabric pushed inward. We both saw it. It stayed there for maybe 5 seconds. Then the pressure disappeared. A moment later, we heard something walking away into the trees. Neither of us slept again. We packed camp before sunrise. At 4 in the morning, we were already hiking, headlamps on, moving as fast as we safely could. Neither of us said a word.
We got back to the car. We drove to the nearest town and ate at a diner with fluorescent lights, other people, and a television in the corner playing sports. It was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. Kelsey flew back to Portland 3 days later. Before she left, she said, "I need to not talk about this for a while." I said, "Okay." Then she looked at me and said, "Don't go back out there alone." I told her I wouldn't. When I got home to Flagstaff, I did what anxious people and researchers always do. I started looking things up. I want to be careful here because the internet has a way of turning everything into sensationalism, and what I found in Dene Navajo tradition isn't mine to interpret or explain. But one thing kept showing up over and over again. The Navajo concept of Yi Naudloshi, often translated as Skinwalker, isn't just about something that changes shape. It's about mimicry, the voice, the imitation. According to the sources I could actually trust, the mimicry isn't just a trick, it's the point. The thing needs you to participate. It needs you to answer, to step outside, to move toward it. Suddenly, the voice outside our tent made perfect sense. It hadn't been trying to scare us. It had been trying to get one of us to unzip the tent. I couldn't stop thinking about what it said. "I forgot my headlamp. Can you bring it?" Not "help me," not "I'm hurt." Just a completely ordinary request, the kind of thing you'd respond to without thinking. 5 seconds. That's all it would have taken. Then another thought hit me. How long had it been watching us? Long enough to learn Kelsey's voice? Long enough to copy the way she joked, the rhythm of her sentences, the words she'd actually use? A day? 2 days? Or had it been there, long before we ever noticed it? About a month after the trip, Kelsey called. She'd been organizing the photos from the hike. She takes pictures of everything, and she'd finally started putting together an album. Her voice sounded different. "Ryan, I need you to look at something." A few seconds later, she texted me a photo. It was from our first campsite. Late afternoon, golden light. I was crouched over the camp stove. Behind me was the meadow, and behind the meadow, the tree line, about 150 feet away. At first, I didn't see it. Then I zoomed in. Standing beside one of the ponderosa pines was a figure. Tall, thin, almost hidden by the tree. The image got blurrier the farther I zoomed, but the shape never changed. It was standing there, watching us. Day 1, before the footprints, before the voices, before either of us realized we weren't alone. It had been there the entire time. I called Kelsey immediately. "I'm going to ask you something and I need you to answer honestly. Okay? Since you got home, has anything happened? Have you heard anything? Seen anything?" She didn't answer right away. The silence told me everything. "Once," she finally said, "about 2 weeks ago, I heard you outside my apartment. Portland, 1,600 miles away. It was your voice," she said. "You called my name, then you laughed exactly the way you do when you're trying to convince me to come outside. It sounded exactly like you." I swallowed. "Did you open the door?"
Another pause. I almost did. I got all the way to the door. My hand was on the knob. Then I remembered. The tent. The headlamp. She'd figured it out herself. She never opened the door. "Don't open it," I said. I know that. Now. Over the next 2 weeks, Kelsey and I came up with a set of rules. Not because we thought rules would save us. We didn't know if they would. But having them gave us something to do with the fear. Something practical. Maybe they'll help someone else too. Rule 1. Never respond to a voice that sounds like someone you know if that person isn't physically with you. Not "who's there," not "stop," not even your own name if it calls you. Say nothing. Rule 2. Never open a door or window at night because of a voice you can't verify, especially if opening it means stepping outside. The request will always sound reasonable. That's the trap. Rule 3. If you're with someone and you hear it, wake them immediately. Don't sit there convincing yourself you're imagining things. Isolation is one of its tools. Don't give it that advantage. Rule 4. Wait for morning. Everything we've experienced suggests daylight matters. Maybe it's a limitation. Maybe it isn't. We don't know. We don't need to know. Just wait for morning. Rule 5. Don't go looking for it. Don't go back to investigate. Don't try to get a better look. Don't photograph it. Don't convince yourself you're just being curious. Curiosity is exactly what gets people into trouble. Rule 5 was the hardest one for both of us, because we're both the kind of people who need answers. For almost 7 months, nothing happened. Not completely. 3 or 4 times I heard something outside my apartment in Flagstaff. I lived on the 2nd floor. Whatever it was, that didn't seem to matter. Sometimes I'd hear it brush against the window screen. One night, I heard it breathing. A slow, steady exhale right outside the glass. Twice, I heard Kelsey's laugh from the alley below, just enough to make me swing my legs out of bed before I caught myself. Then one night, I heard my mother's voice. She'd been dead for 6 years. She said my name. Then she said, "Honey." Then, "It's late. Come inside." Exactly the way she used to call us home when we stayed outside after dark. I'm going to be honest with you. I came closer that night than I ever want to admit. Closer than I should have. I almost opened the window. I almost answered her. I didn't. I'm not going to tell you it was easy, because it wasn't. 7 months after the Kaibab trip, I made a mistake. It was April, still cold in the higher elevations. I drove into Coconona National Forest for a short day hike. Nothing difficult, a trail I'd done at least a dozen times. On the way back, I rolled my ankle. Nothing serious, but it slowed me down just enough that by the time I reached the trailhead, the parking lot was completely dark, empty except for my truck. I unlocked the driver's door. Then I heard something from the tree line. Emma's voice, my girlfriend. She was supposed to be at home. I'd texted her less than half an hour earlier. I didn't answer. I got into the truck, locked the doors, and started the engine. The voice kept talking. "Ryan, I'm out here. I was hiking too. Why won't you answer me?" Every word sounded exactly like Emma. The same rhythm, the same little rise at the end of her sentences. Then it said, "Ryan, I'm scared. I got lost. Please help me." That almost broke me, because even when you know exactly what's happening, your brain doesn't care. It still sounds like the person you love. It still feels real. Some part of you wants to believe it. Some part of you wants to open the door. I gripped the steering wheel with both hands, took a breath, then another, and I stayed exactly where I was. Eventually, the voice stopped. Something moved at the edge of my headlights. A shape, too tall, standing perfectly still in the tree line, not hiding, not moving closer, just waiting. For one brief moment, I had the unmistakable feeling that it wasn't frustrated, it wasn't angry, it was patient, as if it knew it had all the time in the world. I drove home with every light inside the truck.
I've spent the last 11 months thinking about this. I've read everything I could find that treated the subject seriously. That meant ignoring most of the internet and spending my time reading academic ethnography and recorded indigenous oral traditions. They're not perfect sources, but they're better than horror forums. Here's what I think, and I could be completely wrong. I think this thing is very old. I think it's always hunted the same way. The voices, the faces, the mannerisms. None of it is meant to convince you completely. It's a lure. The point isn't to make you believe it's actually your sister. The point is to make it sound enough like your sister that some instinct inside you reacts before your brain has time to think. It's not trying to fool your mind. It's trying to get around it. And that's the part that keeps me awake at night. I think it gets better. I think it learns. The first night on the Kaibab, it was already convincing. The voice was perfect. The request was believable. 7 months later, standing outside my truck, it knew exactly what to say. Please help me. Not because it knew Emma better, because it knew me better. It had spent 7 months learning what almost made me respond. Watching, adjusting, improving. Like it was running the same test over and over until it found the version that almost worked. Whatever this thing is, it's capable of learning, and I don't find that comforting. Kelsey called me last week. She moved back to Arizona. She never said it was because of what happened. Maybe it wasn't. The job opportunity was real. She'd been considering it for months. Now she lives about 40 minutes from Flagstaff. I've seen her more in the past month than I had in the entire year before. Last Saturday, we went hiking. Middle of the day, short trail, back at the truck before sunset. We talked about Mom, about Emma, about Kelsey's new apartment. Eventually, she asked if we should ever do the Kaibab loop again. We both laughed. The answer was obvious. Not this year. At the trailhead, while we were loading our packs into my truck, she looked toward the tree line. Do you think it's still out there? I thought about the shape I'd seen standing at the edge of my headlights. The way it hadn't chased me, hadn't threatened me, just waited. Yeah, I said. I think it's still out there. She nodded, like she'd expected that answer. Then she asked, "Are you scared?" I thought about it for a moment. I used to be scared of it. Now, I'm more scared of the next time I almost open the door. She rested her hand on my arm. But you didn't, though. Every time, you didn't. I looked at her. Not yet. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she looked back toward the trees. Nothing was there. Just ponderosa pines moving in the afternoon wind. Me neither, she said quietly. Not yet. Why I'm posting this? Because 11 months ago, someone on a hiking forum wrote, "It was standing wrong," and for just a moment, I didn't feel completely alone. If you've made it this far, and something about this story feels familiar, not frightening, familiar, then I want you to remember one thing. Remember the headlamp. When the voice sounds exactly like someone you love, when the request is so small and ordinary that it doesn't even feel dangerous, remember, that's the trap. It knows you. It has watched you long enough to know exactly which door to knock on. Don't open it. Don't answer. Wait for morning. Morning always comes.
If you've experienced anything similar, especially around the Colorado Plateau, the Kaibab, or the Four Corners region, my inbox is open. I don't have answers, but I'm listening.
Before I tell you what happened out on Route 9, past the last gas station, past the last cell tower, I need you to promise me something. If you ever hear something call your name in a voice that sounds exactly right, don't answer. Don't even look. Because the thing that took my brother didn't sound like a monster. It sounded like him. It sounded like him so perfectly that for 3 seconds I almost opened the door. This is a true account told to me by a man named Wade Corbin, who used to work forestry contracts in the high country of northern Arizona. I've changed some names. I have not changed what happened. Stay to the end, because the ending isn't what you think it is, and there's a detail in the middle of this story that I need you to remember because it comes back. Let's begin.
Wade Corbin was 34 years old when he took the contract that ended his brother's life, though he wouldn't understand that for another 11 days. He worked for a small outfit that did land surveys and controlled burn prep for the Forest Service. Unglamorous work, the kind that pays well specifically because nobody else wants to spend 6 weeks camping in the high desert with nothing but a satellite phone and a rifle he was licensed to carry but had never once fired at anything alive. His brother, Denny, was 29. Denny was the funny one, the one who could talk his way out of a speeding ticket and into a free appetizer in the same conversation. Denny had just gotten his EMT certification and was between jobs, and when Wade mentioned the survey contract needed a second body, someone to run stakes, log GPS points, keep the fire going, Denny volunteered before Wade finished the sentence. They drove out together in Wade's truck, hauling a trailer with 2 weeks of supplies, planning to resupply at a trading post nearby once a week. The land they were surveying sat in a remote stretch of high desert and pine forest, federal land but bordering private allotments, the kind of in-between country where the roads stop having names and just have numbers, and the numbers stop making sense after a while too. I want to be careful here because this story touches on something that isn't mine to explain fully. The Skinwalker, in Navajo tradition, the Yi-Naldloshi, is not a campfire monster invented for entertainment. It's a real and serious part of Diné spiritual belief, tied to witchcraft, to the corruption of sacred medicine, to a person who has traded their humanity for terrible power. Many Navajo people consider it disrespectful, even dangerous, to talk about it casually, to sensationalize it, or to speak its true name aloud. I'm telling you what Wade told me, using the word he used, because that's the word that was used to him, by a man who knew exactly what he was talking about, and who tried, more than once, to get Wade and Denny to leave before it was too late. That man's name was Sam Yazzie. He ran the trading post 40 minutes from their camp. And on their first resupply run, 6 days in, he was the first person to tell Wade that something was wrong with where they'd pitched their tents. 6 weeks in the woods getting paid to camp? Where do I sign?
The trading post was a low cinder block building with a gas pump out front and a hand-painted sign that had faded to almost nothing. Sam Yazzie was maybe 60, built like a fence post, with the kind of stillness in his face that made you feel like every word he said had been considered twice before it left his mouth. Wade asked him, casually, if there was a good spot to refill their water jugs closer to camp than the post. He pulled out his GPS unit and showed Sam the coordinates where they were set up, a flat clearing about 2 miles off the forest road, near a dry wash that cut down from the ridge. Sam looked at the coordinates for a long moment. Then he looked at Wade. "You're camping there now?" "6 more weeks, give or take." Sam set the GPS unit down on the counter like it had gotten heavier. "Move your camp." Wade laughed, because that's what you do when someone says something like that with a straight face and you don't yet understand you're supposed to be scared. "Contract says we stake it out from that clearing. It's the best flat ground for 2 miles. There's flat ground everywhere out there. Move your camp." Denny, standing by the cooler picking out sodas, wandered over.
What's wrong with the spot?" Sam was quiet again. Wade told me later that this was the part that stuck with him, not what Sam said, but how long he took deciding whether to say it at all. "That wash, the dry one that runs past where you're camped, old people used to call that whole stretch a bad place. Not haunted bad, worse than haunted. You know what I mean by a skinwalker?" Denny actually smiled because 29-year-old EMTs from Phoenix hear Skinwalker and think of internet forums and late-night radio shows, not of a grown man's face going carefully blank in front of them. "I've heard the word," Denny said. "Then forget the word. I'm not going to explain it to you because it's not mine to explain to you, and there's things you don't get to know unless you're supposed to know them. All I'll say is this. If you hear something out there at night that sounds like people, sounds like an animal in pain, sounds like a baby crying, sounds like somebody calling your name, you do not go look, you do not answer, you do not open your tent flap to check. You get in your truck and you drive to the highway, and you don't come back until it's light." Wade told me he remembers the exact sound of the ice machine grinding in the background while Sam said this, because it was the only sound in the room, and it made everything feel very ordinary and very wrong at the same time. "We appreciate the heads up," Wade said, because he genuinely didn't know what else to say. He believed Sam was serious. He didn't believe there was anything actually out there. Those are two very different kinds of believing, and it took Wade a long time afterward to understand that most people who die out in wild country die because they let the second kind cancel out the first. Sam rang up their supplies without another word about it, but as they were walking out, he said one more thing, quiet, almost to himself. "You've got a brother energy between you two. Watch that. They go for family first. Family is easiest to copy because you already trust the voice." Denny didn't hear that last part. Wade did. He didn't tell Denny for 4 more days, and by the time he did, it was already too late to matter.
For the first 5 nights, nothing happened. I want to be honest about that, because the internet has trained us to expect horror stories to start with horror on page 1, and real accounts almost never work that way. Real dread builds through boredom. It builds through 5 completely normal nights of camp cooking and stargazing and Denny doing bad impressions of their childhood dentist until you've built up just enough comfort to be caught off guard. The 6th night, Wade woke up at 2:47 a.m. He remembers the exact time because he checked his watch, a habit from years of wildland work where you learn to always know what time it is in the dark, because he heard something moving on the far side of the wash. It wasn't loud. That was the first wrong thing about it. Wade had spent a decade camping in coyote and elk country, and he knew what those animals sounded like moving through brush, quick, light, purposeful. This was slow, heavy but careful, like something big trying very hard to be quiet and not quite managing it. A step, a long pause, another step. He unzipped the tent flap an inch and looked out. The moon was 3/4 full, enough light to see the wash and the tree line beyond it in silver and black. He saw nothing, but the stepping sound continued for another 2 or 3 minutes, circling. He was almost sure it was circling the edge of their camp at a distance of maybe 80, 90 feet before it stopped. Then, from the direction of the wash, an elk screamed. If you've never heard an elk bugle, it's an extraordinary sound. High, strange, almost human in pitch, especially during rut season. But this wasn't a bugle. Wade knew the difference. This was a distress sound, the kind of sound an elk makes when something is killing it, and it went on for almost 30 seconds, rising and breaking, before it cut off completely. Denny woke up in the other tent. Wade heard him unzip his flap. "You hear that?" Denny called over, low. "Yeah, stay in your tent. Something's got an elk out there."
"Stay in your tent, Denny." There was a silence after that, maybe 10 seconds, and Wade told me it was the worst 10 seconds of the whole 6 days, because he was waiting to hear whether his brother was going to listen to him or not. "Yeah, no, I'm not going anywhere," Denny finally said, and Wade heard the zipper close again. They didn't sleep the rest of that night. In the morning, they walked the wash together, rifle in hand, and found nothing. No blood, no carcass, no tracks in the soft sand along the waterline, except their boot prints and a scattering of old deer sign. No sign that any animal, in distress or otherwise, had been anywhere near that wash in days. That was the part that unsettled Wade more than the sound itself. An animal dying leaves evidence. The desert is not subtle about death. You find bones, blood, drag marks, buzzards circling within hours. There was nothing, just sand, undisturbed except by them. That afternoon, Wade told Denny what Sam Yazzie said at the trading post, all of it, including the part about family being easiest to copy. He'd been putting it off, he admitted to me later, because saying it out loud made it real in a way that just thinking about it hadn't. Denny didn't laugh this time. "So what, you think that's what we heard? Some guy pretending to be an elk? I don't know what I think. I think we finish the week's stakes, we drive to the highway at night instead of camping here, and we come back with proper backup next week. We're already 3 days behind on the North Quadrant. I don't care." Denny went quiet, turning his water bottle in his hands. Wade said this was the moment he wished, more than any other moment in his life, that he'd pushed harder, not asked, told, loaded the truck himself. But Denny was 29 and had never once in his life been afraid of the dark, and Wade had spent their whole childhood being the cautious older brother, while Denny did the thing anyway, and some habits don't break just because the stakes get bigger. 2 more nights, Denny said. We finish the North Quadrant, we go into town Friday, we tell the Forest Service contact we want a security escort or we're not coming back out. Deal? Wade agreed. He has spent every day since wishing he hadn't.
The 7th night was quiet until almost 4 a.m., and Wade had actually allowed himself to fall into a real sleep, the kind where you stop tracking time, when he was woken by his brother's voice outside calling his name. Wade. He sat up immediately. Something in the tone was wrong before his conscious mind had caught up enough to know why. It was Denny's voice, the exact pitch, the exact rasp Denny always had in his throat first thing after waking, but it was coming outside camp, out past the tree line, maybe 60 feet from where Denny's tent still stood zipped shut in front of him. Wade, come here, you gotta see this. Wade told me that in that moment, half asleep, his body was already moving to unzip the tent because it sounded exactly like Denny, and some deep animal part of his brain had already accepted it before his mind caught up. His hand was on the zipper pull. That's when he remembered Sam's warning, word for word, like it had been sitting right at the front of his brain waiting for this exact second. You do not go look, you do not answer, you do not open your tent flap. He froze with his hand on the zipper. Denny? He called back, not moving, not unzipping, just answering with his voice, which he realizes now was probably a mistake, but he was still half asleep and terrified, and it was the most human thing to do. Denny, get back to your tent. I'm right here, man. Come look at this. There's something in the wash. The voice was maybe 10 feet closer than it had been a second ago, though Wade hadn't heard any footsteps. That's when he heard the zipper on Denny's actual tent, the one directly in front of him, 8 feet away, start to open from the inside. What the hell are you talking about, Denny? Said Denny's voice from inside his own tent, groggy and irritated. I'm right here. I just woke up. There was a silence then that Wade described to me as the loudest silence of his life. 2 voices,
Both his brothers, one from inside a zipped tent 8 feet in front of him, one from the darkness 60 feet beyond the tree line. And in the space of that silence, Wade understood with total and complete clarity that one of those voices belonged to something that was not his brother, and it had gotten close enough to camp to know that he'd caught it in a lie, and it had heard Denny's real voice at the exact same time he had. The thing in the trees did not call out again, but Wade heard it, heavy, careful steps, the same rhythm from the first night, moving backward, away from camp, unhurried, not fleeing, retreating, the way something retreats when it's decided to try again later. Denny came stumbling out of his tent with his headlamp on, rifle already in hand from where he kept it just inside the flap, asking what was going on, why Wade had been talking to him through the tent wall like an idiot. Wade didn't answer right away. He was still staring at the tree line. Something out there was using your voice. It found it exactly like you, Denny, exactly. Denny didn't make a joke that time either. Here is the part of the story that Wade has had to live with for the rest of his life, and it's the part I want you to sit with, because it's not a jump scare, it's a decision, and decisions are so much worse in hindsight than monsters are. They should have driven out that night. Wade wanted to. He was already pulling gear toward the truck by the time the sky started going gray at the edges. But Denny, practical, stubborn, 29-year-old Denny, pointed out that it was already almost dawn, that whatever it was clearly didn't operate in daylight, that they had exactly one more day's worth of stakes to finish in the North Quadrant, and that driving out now half-packed in the dark, they'd blow the whole week's progress and have to explain to the contractor why they abandoned a job over what would sound out loud in the office in the daylight like a coyote and some bad nerves. "We finish today," Denny said, "in daylight. We're packed and gone by 6 tonight. We sleep in town, and Monday we come back with the county guy and maybe a couple more people. One more day." Wade agreed to one more day. I need you to understand that Wade has had told me this part of the story more times and in more detail than any other part, because he has spent years turning it over, trying to find the version where he says no instead. There isn't one. He said yes, that's what happened.
They worked the North Quadrant through the daylight hours, and it was, Wade said, almost eerily normal. Good weather, easy ground, Denny cracking jokes about the trading post guy being an old-timer with too much time on his hands. Both of them almost convincing themselves that the night before had been some combination of exhaustion, echo, and imagination playing tricks with sound across open desert. Almost. By 4 p.m., they'd finished the last stake line. By 5, they'd broken half the camp down, and it was at 5:40, with the sun still a hand's width above the ridgeline, plenty of daylight left, that Denny said he was going to make one last check of the wash for their good tape measure, which he thought he'd left near the waterline that morning. "I'll come with you," Wade said. "It's 60 feet, man. I can see camp the whole way. Keep loading the truck." And because it was daylight, because it was 60 feet, because the sun was still up and nothing had happened in daylight yet, Wade let him go. He heard Denny call out from the wash, maybe 4 minutes later that he'd found it, heard him start walking back, watched him come up out of the wash into view, backlit by the low sun, tape measure in hand, waving. And Wade, this is the detail I told you to remember, noticed that Denny was walking differently. Not wrong exactly, just slightly wrong. A half beat off in his gait, like someone doing an impression of walking rather than actually walking, the way you'd move if you'd only ever watched a human being from a distance and never actually been one. Wade didn't say anything. He told himself it was nothing. Denny had twisted his ankle 2 days before on the North Quadrant. Maybe he was still favoring it. That's what he told himself, standing at the truck, watching his brother walk up out of a dry wash in the low gold light of a desert evening, looking completely, perfectly normal, except for 11 inches of stride that were very slightly, very subtly not quite right. They didn't get out by 6.
The transmission chose that exact evening, of every evening in 6 years of ownership, to develop a problem, a hard, grinding refusal to shift out of second gear, which Wade, who knew his way around an engine well enough to survey rough country for a living, couldn't diagnose or fix in the dying light with the tools he had. He'd need a tow, or at minimum a call to the Forest Service contact for a pickup, and there was no cell signal in the clearing. There never had been. That was the whole point of the satellite phone, which was sitting fully charged in Wade's pack, and which he used at 6:70 p.m. to call their contractor and explain they'd need a tow truck out in the morning. Which meant one more night, in the clearing, next to the wash. I'm not going to pretend Wade didn't consider walking out. He told me he seriously weighed it. 2 miles to the forest road on foot in the dark versus staying put with a rifle, a satellite phone, and a truck that at least offered 4 walls and locking doors, even if it couldn't drive. He chose the truck. In hindsight, he thinks it was the only choice that kept him alive, though it's a strange kind of alive to have bought. They moved both sleeping bags into the truck cab and bed, doors locked, rifle loaded and within reach, headlamps off to save the batteries, and because neither of them wanted to advertise exactly where they were. Denny, Wade noticed, was unusually quiet that evening. Not scared quiet, just quiet, in a way that Wade attributed again to the ankle, to the stress of the transmission, to 2 nights of bad sleep catching up with both of them. Around 11 p.m., lying in the truck bed under a tarp, Wade asked him if he was okay. "Yeah," Denny said, "just tired." "You've been walking weird since the wash. Your ankle worse?" There was a pause, longer than it should have taken to answer a simple question about an ankle, and then Denny said, "Yeah, twisted it again down there, I think." It was a completely reasonable answer. Wade almost let it go. But something about the pause bothered him enough that he found himself, for the first time, actually looking at his brother in the dim moonlight rather than just listening to him. Really looking, the way you look at someone when a small alarm has started ringing somewhere in the back of your skull and you don't yet know why.
Denny's eyes, catching the moonlight at a certain angle, didn't quite reflect the way eyes should. Wade has told me he's turned this detail over 1,000 times since, trying to decide if it was real or if it was fear manufacturing evidence to match a suspicion that had already taken root. Human eyes have a faint reflective quality in low light, a small gleam, subtle, easy to miss. What Wade says he saw for less than a second was not that gleam. It was something closer to the flat greenish shine you see in a dog or a deer caught in headlights. There and then gone, so fast he could have imagined it, so fast he desperately wanted to have imagined it. He didn't say anything. He told me this was the second decision he regrets almost as much as not leaving the night before, the decision to stay quiet, to talk himself out of what he'd seen, because the alternative was too enormous to hold on to in the dark, alone, with no way to leave. They didn't talk much after that. Wade lay awake with the rifle across his chest, watching the shape of his brother's sleeping bag rise and fall with breathing that sounded, if you paid close enough attention, just a fraction too slow and too even to be natural. At 1:15 a.m., Wade heard it again, the elk scream. Closer this time, close enough that he felt it more than heard it, a pressure against his eardrums as much as a sound. Denny's sleeping bag didn't move. Wade sat up slowly, rifle in hand, and looked over the edge of the truck bed toward the wash. In the moonlight, he could see something standing at the lip of it, tall, too tall, standing on what looked at first like 2 legs, and then, as it shifted its weight, seemed for one terrible half-second to be balanced wrong, joints bending in a direction that didn't belong to anything Wade had ever seen move. It wasn't looking at him. It was looking at the truck bed, at the shape of Denny's sleeping bag, with what Wade can only describe as patience, the stillness of something that has already gotten what it wanted and is simply waiting to see what happens next. Wade raised the rifle. That's when the sleeping bag beside him moved, and Denny's voice, thick with sleep, said, "Wade, what's—" And Wade, rifle still raised, still watching the shape at the wash, said the only thing he could think to say, low and even, the way you talk to someone you need to not panic. "Denny, don't move. Just tell me, when we were kids, what did Grandma Corbin used to call you when you wouldn't eat your vegetables?" It was a stupid question. It was also, Wade told me, the only test he could think of in the space of about 2 seconds. Something small, specific, buried, the kind of family detail that a voice could maybe fake, but that he'd know instantly, in his gut, if it was even slightly wrong. There was a pause. Then, "Mr. Picky Pants, why the hell are you asking me that right now? There's something right there." And Wade, this is the detail, the one I told you to hold on to from the beginning, realized that the shape at the wash had gone completely still the moment Denny spoke. Not frozen in fear, frozen the way something goes still when it's listening, cataloging, learning. Because 2 nights before, that thing had used Denny's voice and gotten his exact pitch and rasp right, called him from the darkness with total confidence, but it hadn't known about Mr. Picky Pants. Wade realized with a horror he says physically hollowed out his chest that the reason it hadn't tried to fake an answer wasn't because it didn't want to, it was because it was still listening, still learning. It hadn't gotten close enough to Denny, the real Denny, to know that detail yet. Which meant the voice answering him right now, right beside him in the truck bed, 3 feet away in the dark, reciting the correct answer without hesitation, had gotten close enough at some point to know it.
Wade didn't lower the rifle. He didn't turn to look at the shape beside him either. Some animal instinct told him that looking away from the thing at the wash while something else was 3 feet from him in the dark was exactly the mistake that got people killed out here. "When did you learn that?" Wade said, very quietly, to the shape in the sleeping bag. "What learn, Wade? What is wrong with you?" And the voice cracked with exactly the right note of fear and confusion that Denny's voice would crack with, and Wade wanted it so badly to believe it, wanted it with a physical ache in his chest that he says was worse than any fear he felt that night. "Grandma's been dead 9 years, Wade said. "You never told anyone that story after she died. I only know it because I was there. So did you tell somebody that story in the last 6 days, Denny, or did something hear you say it in your sleep?" Silence. Then the shape at the wash, the tall thing, the wrong-jointed thing, made a sound. Not the elk scream this time. Something lower, a kind of low, wet clicking, 3 sharp pulses, and Wade said it was the first sound all night that didn't sound like it was trying to imitate anything human, and it was somehow the most frightening sound of the entire ordeal precisely because of that, because it was honest. And the shape beside him in the sleeping bag answered the clicking sound with the exact same 3-pulse click in perfect unison, before its face, turning toward Wade for the first time, moonlight catching it fully, resolved from something that had looked a half-second before exactly like his brother's face to something that was wearing his brother's face the way a mask is worn, correct in every visible detail and utterly, fundamentally absent behind the eyes. He fired. He fired twice, point blank into the thing in the sleeping bag, and the sound it made when it died was not a sound he has ever been able to describe to me in a way that didn't make his hands shake, even years later, telling it over coffee in a diner outside Flagstaff. He fired a 3rd round at the shape near the wash as it broke into a dead run, not toward him, away, into the dark, moving in a long, low, wrong-jointed gait that no human body should have been capable of moving, and then it was gone, and the desert was silent except for his own breathing and the ringing in his ears. He does not remember the next several minutes clearly. What he remembers is standing in the truck bed at some point afterwards, rifle still smoking, looking down at what was left in the sleeping bag, and it was... I'm going to be careful with this detail because Wade asked me to be careful with it, and I think that's the right instinct. It was not his brother. It had never been his brother. It did not look human at all once it was dead,
and Wade has never fully explained to me what it did look like, except to say that its face, in the last half-second before it died, was still trying to hold Denny's shape, and failing, the way wax fails to hold a shape too close to a flame. He does not know to this day exactly when the swap happened. His best guess, the one that keeps him up most nights, is that it happened during those 4 minutes in the wash when Denny went to retrieve the tape measure alone, in daylight, 60 feet away, close enough that Wade could see him, but far enough that he couldn't hear anything at all. He never found Denny's body. He drove out that night. The transmission, miraculously or not miraculously, worked fine once he needed it to, and reported everything to the county sheriff, who sent a search team back to the wash in the surrounding country for 11 days. They found Denny's boots, half buried in sand about a quarter mile up the wash from the clearing. Nothing else. No blood trail. No remains. Just the boots, placed, not dropped, not kicked off, placed, side by side, laces still tied, as though someone had set them down deliberately and walked away from them barefoot into the desert.
Sam Yazzie closed the trading post 2 months later and moved to Gallup. Wade drove out to see him before he left and asked him, finally, the question he'd been carrying since that first conversation over the ice machine. "Why'd you say it goes for family first? Why family?" Sam was quiet for a long time, that same considering stillness, before he answered. "Because a stranger's voice you can be suspicious of. A brother's voice you let all the way in before you think to check. That's not really about them. That's about you. That's about what love does to your guard. I told you at the beginning to remember something. It's this, the gait, the half-beat-off walk Wade noticed when Denny came up out of the wash in the daylight, tape measure in hand, waving, backlit by a low gold sun, 4 minutes after he'd gone down alone to look for it. Wade has never been able to shake the thought that in that moment, in broad daylight, well before the elk scream, well before the clicking sound, well before any of what he'd called the horror part of this story, he was already looking at it, that the thing had already taken his brother's place before the sun had even gone down, and that it walked up out of that wash and waved at him and smiled at him, with a smile Wade has spent years trying to remember as being subtly wrong, and has never been fully sure wasn't just his own grief editing the memory after the fact. And that the real horror of that night, the reason Wade tells this story at all, the reason he wanted it told, isn't the thing at the wash, or the clicking sound, or what he found and didn't find in that sleeping bag. It's that for 6 full hours, from 5:44 p.m. to 1:15 a.m., he sat 3 feet away from something wearing his brother's face, ate dinner across a tailgate from it, made small talk with it about a transmission problem, and felt nothing wrong at all, because it was that good. Because grief and love make you the easiest mark in the world for a mimic. And the only reason he's alive to tell you this story is one stupid childhood nickname that a dead grandmother gave a boy for not eating his peas 40 years ago in a kitchen 1,000 miles from that wash. A detail so small and so private that even something that could copy a man's voice, a man's walk, a man's laugh, hadn't gotten close enough yet to steal it. Wade told me he thinks about that a lot, not the thing in the desert, the margin, how thin it was, one question, one answer that came half a second too fast from a voice that learned everything except the one thing that mattered. He said if you ever find yourself in wild country at night and you hear someone who loves you calling your name from somewhere they shouldn't be, ask them something only they would know. Something small, something nobody would think to fake. And if the answer comes back too fast, too smooth, too complete,
don't wait to see what happens next. If this story got under your skin, you're not alone. I still think about that wash every time I camp near a dry creek bed. Drop a comment telling me where you'd have made your exit, the trading post, the first night, or the second, because I promise you, every person who's heard this story has a different answer, and it changes the moment you actually imagine yourself out there. Subscribe if you want more true accounts like this one, because next week's story is worse. Stay safe out there, and if anything ever calls your name from the dark using a voice you love, don't answer.